Hi guys, welcome to episode 6 of the Healing Haley Show. If you're here again, thank you for being here and thank you for showing up for yourself. So today we're going to be speaking about attachment styles and specifically the dismissive avoidant attachment. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a licensed professional. I'm just a girl who's sharing her story in hopes that it can help a few people along the way. If you do want to search for that licensed or professional help, please seek it elsewhere. If you want to stay and keep listening, today we are speaking about dismissive avoidance. In the last episode, we spoke about attachment styles in general and the anxious attachment. So go check that video out, that episode out, because understanding what an attachment style even is and understanding all the attachment styles in general is very helpful and necessary. So my name's Haley Foreman. I'm going to be your host today. Like this video. Subscribe, comment, it really helps me out, and stay in touch, ask questions. I'm open to anything. So let's start looking at what dismissive avoidance kind of encompasses in general. A person with a dismissive avoidant attachment style has a hard time being open with others. They often reject emotional overtures from loved ones or partners, and they can just end up feeling like relationships aren't worth it. Like, they're just too much trouble. So if you identify with any of those feelings, or you know someone in your life who does, chances are you have dismissive avoidance in your life to some degree. Let's talk about the signs and symptoms specifically. In children, we speak about the signs in children first because you could have a child that you're trying to figure out what's going on with them emotionally, or it's also helpful if you just want to look back on your childhood, because it will help you unearth some things that maybe you forgot about. So, number one, this kind of ultra independence. Even if they're a kid, they still have that, like, they want to do everything on their own. Number two, they act like they don't have any emotional needs. They're unemotional. They can also have difficulty like crying or expressing their emotions in a more vulnerable way. And number 5 is physical contact. So they're uncomfortable with physical contact. And for me as a kid, there was a shift, and there definitely was a time where I wasn't so uncomfortable with physical contact with my family or my parents, and then something happened with my mom that just I no longer felt comfortable. And even to this day, I don't feel comfortable being physically close to anyone other than my partner, which is interesting because my love language is physical touch. My number one love language is physical touch. So like I said, going back through these symptoms, you can start to think, oh, but I do have that. Like, I do have issues with physical contact outside of just my partner. Why do I have issues with that? Or why does it feel like uncomfortable to me? Because you can think in your head like, oh, it just feels uncomfortable to you. But that's the whole process of growing and healing, is like you have to really dig at like, why does it feel uncomfortable to you? And you may end up at the same answer. You may end up at, yeah, it just feels uncomfortable to me, but there's nothing more. But you have to make sure that you really dig through it, because there may be something more there. And for me, when I saw that, or when I read about that, I immediately thought like I was physically close with my mom at a point, and other people. I wasn't so uncomfortable with physical contact. And then there was a shift. And there was, stuff that happened in my childhood that shifted that. And I remember people who would say, "Oh, you're so close with your mom. Like, you hug her and you kiss her and you play." I used to like, it's kind of mean, but I wasn't being mean as a kid, but I used to get her to like stretch her arm out, and I would like flick her extra skin under there. Yeah, it was kind of mean, but my mom was quite thin. Like, it wasn't like I was picking on her or something. And you're just playing. But I remember I was close like that with her, and then I wasn't. And I had a situation with her where, she was really going through a lot. Like, she just wasn't feeling good about herself and was in a really bad place. And it's not an excuse, but I'm 30 years old tomorrow, so I can look back and have empathy and understand that she was going through things. But I went on vacation with her, and there were even other times as well where when she got angry, she like hit me. And it wasn't just, like a slap on the wrist. Like, it was like an actual like fight almost. And I was just kind of like, what the hell? Like, what are you doing? And she was obviously very remorseful and whatnot. But even when I think about those moments now, I can just remember that like, you were not like this, like you were not okay, and obviously not a great way to deal with those emotions, not a good way at all. But I remember that those instances, like, I can see that I shifted from not wanting to be like just feel like being close like that just made me feel uncomfortable. So looking back at that can help you to say, oh yeah, like, I remember these times, or like I can think back to like, why would I feel uncomfortable? And you can kind of bring those things up and acknowledge them and say like, yeah, actually I do remember like a distinct difference in my childhood when I hit like 11 or 12, and conveniently that's when those things happened. So chances are that added to it. Now let's talk about some signs of avoidant attachment in adulthood. So there are a lot. So pause the video, do what you have to do, think about them, write down any of them that you might identify with, or you think your partner identifies with, or a friend. And let's jump into it. So once again, holding independence as like the most important thing. They are self-sufficient. They don't need anybody. That's another thing, believing you don't need anyone else and you have to do it all on your own. And I think that where this comes from is there can be two things, but your parent could have actually manipulated you and helped you, but it wasn't actually helping you. It was for their own gain, or they just kind of used you in the moment. So now it makes you feel like you don't want anyone's help because it feels unsafe to you. Or it can come from someone being very overprotective, so doing everything for you and then kind of making fun of you or belittling you and making you feel like you weren't able to do it on your own. So now you have that feeling. And I've had that where I've tried to help friends or partners, and they literally are like, no, I can do it by myself. And it's like, okay, like, no one is saying you can't do it by yourself, but like, it would also help if you got help, Anyway, that is definitely a pretty big sign that you have some avoidant tendencies. You avoid talking about emotions. You refuse to talk about your past. So I've had relationships where I've spoken to the person about their past, and they just like reeled off these things that happened in their past and spoke about it like it was very a matter of fact. And I remember thinking, when the relationship kind of got to a bad point, I was like, or kind of ended, I was like, why can I only recognize right now that was a much bigger issue than I thought it was at the beginning? Because I'm the type of person that if I think something's an issue, I'm going to talk to the person about it. Like, I'm going to be like, hey, let's talk. Like, let's, what happened here? And because I deeply want to understand people and understand them on an emotional level and understand them, through their past to where they are now. So I know I would ask questions like that, but then I thought to myself, why didn't I? Like, this is so weird. Why didn't I ask those questions? And the reason that I didn't ask those questions is because that person was so good at just like making it seem as if they were totally cool with it. Like they had processed it and they're like, yeah, it's totally fine. This happened. Yeah, it's kind of an unorthodox thing to happen in a childhood, but it is what it is. And I remember thinking in that moment, oh my gosh, that's so mature. Or, this person has processed it. And that's why I didn't keep diving in. That's why I didn't keep asking those questions when, I needed to have been asking those questions. But also you can only ask as many questions as, like, someone also has to be willing to be vulnerable and be emotionally vulnerable. And that's the biggest thing here, that dismissive avoidant people will tell you something very surface level, but they won't tell you the emotional root. And they're good at playing it off like it's absolutely okay. So definitely watch out for that. Definitely start thinking to yourself, did this person tell me what happened, or did they tell me how they feel about what happened? And if it's missing that feeling about what happened, then you can start recognizing it. Or they just refuse to talk about their past in general. That's a pretty clear sign. They have very strong personal boundaries, and negotiating or compromising around those are like, absolutely not. And very like individualistic. And once again, I don't support that. I don't think it's going to help connection on the planet. The whole point of why we're here is love, and the way that you receive and give love is through connection. So if you're living this very like individualistic lifestyle of like, this is what I do and I'm okay and I'm like good with not communicating or talking to people for 90% of my life, and the other 10 times I will because that's what makes me feel safe. It's like, okay, but stop using the word unsafe. It makes you feel uncomfortable. Yes, there are certain things that make people feel unsafe because those situations are unsafe. But you have to get much more discerning about what's uncomfortable versus what's unsafe. Otherwise, you're not going to create long-lasting, deep connections in your life. You just... Like, I have dismissive avoidant tendencies that I had to work through too. And it can be really hard to acknowledge, and it can be really hard to feel those feelings, but you need to feel them to work through them. And it's absolutely necessary. So, like, it's necessary for connection and for love. And we all want that. Whether we say we do or don't, we all want that. So, dismissive avoidant people can shut down if someone pushes you to get deep or be emotional. I've had this in partnerships where, as you can tell, I've had many partnerships or friendships with dismissive avoidant people. I have literally had a partner just shut down, like 100% shut down. Didn't say another word to me, like, in that conversation. I've never had that before in my life, but yeah. And then obviously having that happen just made me even more anxious, and I was like, what the heck? Like, I did not understand that. And obviously I had my own emotional maturity to work on as well. But being in a relationship with someone who's dismissive avoidant, I mean, you can feel like this person is so cold and like mean, you that's dismissive avoidant people often get accused of being that way. And I mean, to them, they're protecting themselves, but really they're just putting up a barrier between themselves and love. And they're not willing to talk about how they feel because they're too uncomfortable or scared, or they feel like they're like a burden to talk about their own. It's a burden to talk about their own feelings and stuff. So those are things you have to work through, because the right people will not feel that way. The right people, the healthy people in your life will not feel like the things you have to say are a burden. Just remember that. So you constantly find faults in other people. You have this ideal partner or past partner that you constantly compare all your relationships to. If you're in a romantic relationship and you're dismissive avoidant, you can often feel stifled in that relationship. If you have like a real issue with the just feeling so locked down in that commitment, like that person is taking away your autonomy or something. And dismissive avoidant people, lastly, are more prone to casual relationships for that reason, rather than a relationship that is committed. So, there's like 10 or 12 symptoms, signs of dismissive avoidance. So if you're checking off majority of those, then you definitely want to sit down with this and start working through your insecure attachment. And, it can be hard. It can be hard to acknowledge these things, especially if you're dismissive avoidant. You tend to push away those feelings and not want to deal with it. You tend to avoid those feelings, Avoidant attachment means that you lacked healthy bonding as a child, and that's made you very suspicious of relationships. So you react to intimacy by backing off and avoiding it. And for me, I've been in relationships with people who are dismissive avoidant. And specifically in relationships, you'll notice at the 1.5 mark that if you're a dismissive avoidant person, you tend to start pushing that person away. Or if you're in a relationship, they tend to start pushing you away at that kind of between a year and a year and a half. And I've had it happen multiple times to me without really recognizing what that was about. So now that we've spoken about all the signs, let's start talking about what could have caused this. I kind of said it a little bit there, that you lack healthy bonding as a kid. And let's talk about what that bonding can look like. Your parent or caregiver may have lacked empathy. And didn't really sit with you in your feelings. And maybe that was because they lacked the knowledge on how to support a child. Maybe they didn't even know how to support themselves. People who are avoidant tend to have avoidant parents or caregivers. So for me, specifically in one of my relationships, I can remember meeting their parents, and like they didn't even sit down with me for 10 minutes to have a conversation to get to know me. You know, how is it that someone is not dating your child and you have no interest in knowing the person who is? And then that just leads me as a person to having so much more empathy for my ex-partner or partners, because this has happened multiple times, but you just realize that they're acting that way because that's what they've been shown their whole life. They don't know any different. And people learn at different points along their life. You know, not everybody is just gonna be in a relationship and figure it all out. That's not how things work. There is divine timing in it as well. You know, people are awakened to things at different points. People have different things to go through. And I'm not of the mindset of just like, oh, well, no matter what your childhood was, you should know how to treat people and how not to treat people. And I think it's important to definitely keep checking yourself and being like, am I treating the people in my life, like, am I treating them well? Am I treating them in a way that's healthy? Like, I definitely think that's important, but you know, not everybody's going to learn on the same timeline. You know, there may have been literally just one thing in a person's life that was different than another person's life that led them to that feeling of like, you know, I should work on my maturity. Maybe the other person has never been in relationships or situations that have really tested them or caused them to need to shift. I don't know. There's all sorts of things. So I don't believe that. Like, you learn in your own time when it happens, but when you learn, you start doing better. That's it. You know, you don't learn and then keep doing the same stuff. Now we're getting into something different. But once you learn, once you figure it out, you move forward in a better way. So the reason that I kind of stuck on that is because, like, have compassion for yourself. Have empathy for yourself first before you go giving it to anybody else. Have it for yourself first and understand why you are the way you are, why you've been making those decisions, so that you can stop stunting your own growth because of things you didn't ask for. You know, things that happen to you that you didn't ask for as a child. You had no control over them happening to you. So be gentle with yourself. And keep going down this path. Keep acknowledging things in your own time, you know. But just make sure you stop hurting yourself and you stop hurting other people. You know, obviously, everyone to some degree is going to, you know, break a promise to themselves or you know, maybe hurt someone else at some point. But you don't want to just go projecting that out onto the world without a care. Like, no one wants to be that person. So what else could have happened? Your parents could have felt overwhelmed by their parenting responsibilities. So they guilted you or neglected you or shamed you. You know, they could have shamed you for having feelings, because you having feelings means they're not parenting right. And then acknowledging that is too much for them. And so it's just easier to make you feel bad about your feelings so they don't have to deal with it. They could have been abusive or emotionally distant. So literally when you needed them emotionally, they just were not there. And that's kind of abusive, honestly. In relationships, I do think it's kind of abusive. So sit with that and think to yourself, you know, were my parents there for me? Not just were they there for me, did they hug me and kiss me and tell me it's going to be okay, but did they sit with me in my emotions? Did they hear me out? Did they hold space for how I felt around the things that they did or someone they loved did? You know, sit in those feelings too, because it's not just about, you know, your mom hugged you or your dad, you know, let you lie down with him and everything was okay. Like you do have to talk about things and move through the actual emotions. And lastly, your parent could have tended to your needs, but very inconsistently. So some things they were there for you, some things they weren't. And that created this distrust and this general feeling of, you know, getting close to someone is unsafe because I never know when they're going to be there for me or not. And it's just easier for me to be here for myself. That's usually a very typical like dismissive avoidant train of thought. So we're kind of getting towards the end of this episode now. The last thing that we're going to speak about is how to deal with a partner who is dismissive avoidant. So we kind of spoke about what dismissive avoidance looks like and what causes it, but now let's talk about if you're in a relationship with someone who's dismissive avoidant specifically. What are some of the things that can help them? Number one, don't keep pushing when they feel overwhelmed. Try to be there for them when they've calmed down. So allow them that space to just feel their feelings, because dismissive avoidant people tend to need a little bit of time to process their emotions. Not always, but they tend to need a little bit of time. They get really overwhelmed by a lot of emotional or by intensely emotional like conversations because they've gone so badly in the past. And now they can kind of be bringing that into the relationship now and thinking this isn't going to go well. I can't say how I feel because the person's not going to understand and the person's going to hate me and the person's going to get angry at me, whatever. And then what usually happens in that space is if you keep going, now they're going to start like lying maybe or being really mean, like anything to avoid the emotional intimacy or vulnerability. They're going to do what they have to do in that moment. So it's not going to get you anywhere either. So definitely, and just in general, I think if you're in a partnership or a friendship and you can feel that like the tension is running high, like it's always good to just be like, all right, let's just cool this down for a second, you know, and get back to a place that's calm and gentle. Number two, understanding their past experiences are driving their present behaviors. So that's simply just saying like having compassion and empathy and depersonalizing things. So not thinking that their actions today are necessarily reflective of how they feel about you, but just how they feel around certain things as a whole because of what has happened to them in their past. Number three, let your partner know you're here for them if they need you. So kind of allowing a dismissive avoidant person to come to you. The only thing I would say here is definitely talk about that a little bit, not just saying, oh, I'm ready when you are. I think it would more be like, hey, I can tell that maybe you're not ready to have this conversation right now, but for me to be in this relationship or friendship, I do need to have this conversation, and you can let me know what timeline you think is okay or what timeline you might need to think this over. And we can come to an agreement on when we're going to talk about it, but we do need to talk about it. So when you're ready, you know, you can come talk to me. And then, but put a timeline on it, I think, because for me, I've left that open and then the person just never comes to you. And you're left feeling like you have to bring it up again, and then you bring it up again. And then all of a sudden you're the person who keeps bringing it up. And so be really clear from the beginning of like, hey, this happened. Do you think you need a few days to think it over, or what do you think? And the person may say, no, I just think I need tonight, and then we can talk about it tomorrow. Maybe, you know, or maybe the person will say, I need a couple of weeks. Like this is like big for me, but I do want to talk to you about it. And then, so you can kind of hold them accountable a little bit, because avoidant people tend to just keep avoiding, especially if it goes on longer and longer, they'll just be like, oh, maybe I can just avoid it. Next one. Setting healthy boundaries about what you will and won't tolerate. So if you're in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant person, and honestly, this is any attachment style, because of course, anxiously attached and fearful avoidant people also do things that are unhealthy. But just having a conversation around what's okay, because you can't want to have a relationship with your partner if you're just constantly walking on eggshells, or like trying to fulfill their needs when your needs aren't being met, so you're just dancing around all these things to not upset them or throw them off or trigger them in some way. But it can't be that. Like, both people need to be ready and willing to work through things. And yes, maybe there may be one person who is a little bit more emotionally mature or has worked on themselves a little bit more and is more familiar with that. But the other person still needs to show initiative and consistency towards working on things. So that's where you can kind of set boundaries around, like, hey, this is what I need. You acting in this way is not okay for me because it makes me feel unsafe. Like for me, I've had relationships where we spoke about working on things and then we never worked on things. I kept bringing it up for like well over a year, and it just, once again, multiple relationships, not just one. And it eventually got to a point of, just causing a lot of distress in the relationship. So you have to be able to have a conversation to say, like, hey, this is not meeting my needs. Like, this relationship in this way is not meeting my needs, and it's not okay for me. If we're not going to talk about these things, we have to think about what that means. And like just having a frank conversation like that. And if that person wants to take that as like, oh, you're just threatening to break up, it's like, okay, let them think that, because there's a difference between like firmly stating your needs and your boundaries and then like threatening to break up. It's two different things. If someone is constantly like not giving back to you and you're like, hey, well then we need to talk about what this means. Maybe you need to go do it on your own, or maybe we just can't do it together, or we need to try another way or something, and that person's not really giving you anything back. And then you're like, okay, well maybe we need to talk about what that means. If that person wants to say you're threatening a relationship and being immature, well then, in my opinion, let them. Like, you have to firmly say like, hey, this is what I need. And obviously be willing to compromise and willing to talk about it. But if the other person is just like not really willing, then you have to look at that. And the reason that I always state that and I'm really firm with that is because being in a relationship that is causing you that like emotional pain can be extremely destructive. So you can't do that to yourself. Last but not least, change your tone of voice. So for me, this was really difficult because, once again, I'm Jamaican. I'm kind of passionate and aggressive even at times, and my tone of voice really wasn't helping certain situations. So like I said many episodes ago, like I could have been more gentle. I could have kind of calmed it down, but I was so anxious in the moment and had all those feelings and didn't know how to work through them and didn't know what was happening. And, obviously I've grown a lot since then, but in those moments I had that, and I had that reaction. And, having a conversation around emotions in a more relaxed, calm way can help the other people, or help the other person to really feel more comfortable. and feel more comfortable in labeling their own feelings instead of being focused on like it feeling unsafe now, you know. But as a kid, I had those conversations. Like I had, like, if there was a situation with my dad and we disagreed about something, like not something grand, but just disagreed about something, like it was a argumentative conversation. And that didn't bother me, but it does bother other people, or it does make other people feel like, you know, it's not going to be okay now or safe now. So you do kind of have to recognize if your partner maybe needs just to have the conversation in another way. And obviously you have to talk about your cultures, and you both have to compromise. Like you both have to understand and depersonalize situations and compromise. So on both parts, you have to work, and you have to be willing to just talk about all these little things that may be throwing you off. So guys, we're at the end of this episode. We spoke about symptoms, causes, how to navigate relationships with a dismissive avoidant person. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about fearful avoidance. That is the attachment style I most identify with. So yeah, there'll be a lot to say in that episode. But like I said, watch all of them. Keep going. If you are a dismissive avoidant person and you took the step to watch this and you want to start acknowledging it, then I just want to send you some extra love and strength and courage, because it's hard. It's hard to acknowledge these things and to start feeling those feelings that you've been pushing aside for so long. So I am completely with you, 100%. The next episode, as I said, we're going to be talking about fearful avoidance. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Lots of love, lots of light, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.